Well, hello and welcome to all you dog lovers, because that's obviously the reason that you're here tonight. Now, did you know that Mexico has one of the world's highest stray dog populations, with an estimated 17 to 25 million stray dogs, and 70% of the total population of dogs in Mexico live on the street? It's a very sobering statistic. But tonight is not going to be sobering. It's going to be all about dogs in art. And you're going to see just a sampling of the thousands of images of them, all with the intention of tugging at your heartstrings and encouraging you, despite what Paul said, to open your wallets to help build a much needed dog rescue and shelter facility on the outskirts of Tepoztlan. So let's begin with a few, I think, very eloquent quotes. So by Will Rogers, "I love a dog. He does nothing for political reasons. And no one appreciates the very special genius of your conversation as a dog does." That's by Christopher Murray, a journalist, novelist, poet, and essayist. And I love this one. "It's just the most amazing thing to have a dog, isn't it? It makes our relationships with people seem as boring as oatmeal." And that's by John Grogan, who is the author of Marley and Me, and also, which was made into that very popular film. And finally, and this seems particularly apt, the quote by Barack Obama, "Lots of shelter dogs are mutts like me." But let's begin in Mexico. So this small kneeling figure on the left of model terracotta is one of the earliest examples of representational art found to date in the Valley of Mexico, and described as a masterpiece because of its originality, vitality, and spontaneity. It's a true image of tenderness, a snapshot of the moment that the puppy leaps into the woman's arms. And on the right, we have Xolotl, the Aztec god of death. He had a dog head, and it was said that the dogs on earth were sent to be his emissaries. And this late post-classic Mexica piece displays a dog-like deity. With its half-open snout showing fangs, he's often associated with the underworld and Quetzalcoatl. And if you look, here, you can see some of the original red pigment, and also here. And what I didn't know until recently is that this was discovered intact when Line 2 of the Mexico City Metro was being excavated. So dogs held a prized position in Mesoamerican culture, but that all changed with the arrival of the Spanish. Hairless breeds of dogs, Xoloitzcuintli, excuse my pronunciation, have appeared in the art of Mesoamerican cultures of Western Mexico for over 3,000 years. And one of the principal reasons for this was that the faith that people had in dogs' ability to guide them through the terrible dangers of the world of the dead. Now, the proper name for what we know as the Colima dogs are Tlalchichi. And among all the breeds that existed in Mesoamerican lands, there was one especially beloved, and it's this one. And although it disappeared centuries ago, it remains an important part of cultural heritage. The name comes from Nahuatl, and it means dog of the earth or dog of the floor. And it refers to their short-legged and robust appearance. So pottery dogs such as this one have been found by archaeologists in Colima mausoleums. And these dogs acted as humanity's guides and protectors. And on the right, we have seated warrior with two dogs. Now, the presence of dogs in this sculpture may indicate a ritualistic or funerary context, linking the figure to death, protection, or guidance. And looking at this image, we get a sense of the enduring connections between humans, animals, and the spiritual world in ancient Mesoamerican cultures. As I mentioned, cholos remain a powerful cultural icon in Mexico. And here we see this wonderful painting by Rufino Tamayo. And the light that bathes these dogs is eerie, but they seem more curious, more interested than afraid, less snarling than excited. The blue bones that you can see at the bottom, they can be seen as an allusion to the living bone torn from the underworld at great cost by Xolotl and used by his twin Quetzalcoatl to create humanity, and by Xolo himself to create Xolo. Now this is not my quote, but this I think is very pertinent in terms of 2026. Xolos stand for hope in a world that's crashing, a reminder that all things must pass and can be recreated in another form. It seems very apt at the moment. On the moment at the right, we have the dancing dogs of Colima, and this monumental statue of Colima dogs created by artist Guillermo Rios Alcalá, a master of pre-Hispanic art, towers over a traffic circle in Colima. Now, I looked absolutely everywhere to find out the dimensions, just how big these dogs are, but wasn't able to find it. All that I kept getting was monumental, enormous, gigantic. But what the artist aimed to do is to depict the intergenerational transfer of power and knowledge from an older Xolo dog to a younger one. And let's now go back a little bit further to Juba and Shuweimis in Saudi Arabia. So this is very interesting. This composite image of rock art discovered in Saudi Arabia shows a hunter with 13 dogs and a few possible leashes. The hunting scenes etched into the rock walls of dried out valleys and slopes in the Arabian Peninsula are the oldest archaeological evidence of dog leashes. And this is what's so interesting, suggesting that humans were controlling and training dogs even before they settled down into farming communities. And on the right, we have the Book of the Dead. The ancient Egyptians believed that men and animals were created together by the sun god Ra, and therefore animals and humans were partners in life and worthy of respect. They trusted the dog with both their lives and their souls. And in this detail from the Book of the Dead, we can see Anubis, the dog deity, and he is leading Hunefer, who is a royal scribe, and he's going to be weighed on the right. You can see the plumb to adjust the scales. And this is to see whether Hunefer had led an ethical and moral life, and to see whether or not he was eligible for the afterlife. Now, two very familiar images, even though they were, as you can see, a very, very long time ago. This Pompeii dog mosaic, found in a structure, and I do like this description, found in the house of the tragic poet. One wonders what made him tragic. And the house was thought to have been built around the end of the 1st century BCE. And this warns visitors that there were dogs present in the house. And so Kawe Kanem, meaning beware of the dog. So this would be a very nice one, I think, to have outside the wall in Tepoztlan. And on the right, this is known as the Alexandra dog. And it's been dated to the 2nd century BCE, and it was unearthed in what is known as Lower Egypt. The naturalistic rendition of the dog could rival any of those in oil paintings by old masters, because here's a living, breathing animal, much like Kimmy, who knows he's guilty of knocking over the vase. Look at the expression on his face. He could just as easily be living today as 2,000 years ago. Oops, I'm sorry. You've seen that one? So these Saluki hounds were painted by Xuanzong, the 5th Ming emperor. And the inscription on the painting reads, "Playfully painted by the imperial brush in 1427. And it's believed that Saluki hounds originated thousands of years ago, either in Egypt or the deserts of Saudi Arabia. And the Arab poet Abu Nuwa wrote that a Saluki hound, and this is what he wrote, like a hawk swooping on sand grouse, he peels the skin of the earth with 4 feet. He runs so swiftly." And on the right, they're known as the Townley Greyhounds, and that's after the owner of the piece, which I'm ashamed to say is somebody from England. And these exquisite dogs were found southeast of Rome in 1774. But it was later suggested that they were in fact not greyhounds, but Saluki hounds. The sculptor, however, has captured the tenderness of their emotions, and the details and the expression on the dogs' faces suggest that they must have either belonged to the sculptor or at least he knew them very well. Dignity and impudence. Sir Edwin Landseer was a notable painter and sculptor in 19th century Britain, in 19th century British art, and his dog paintings of the 1830s are among his most celebrated works. Dignity and impudence remains the most popular of all, and here Landseer wittily contrasts the scale and character of the bloodhound whose name was Grafton, what a very distinguished name that is, and a West Highland Terrier called Scratch, so 2 very appropriate names. Now, what I find fascinating about this is that Landseer's composition parodies the Dutch portrait tradition, whereby a subject is framed by a window and a hand or an arm is over the ledge. So Landseer has done exactly the same thing, because if you look, Grafton's paws are over the edge of the kennel. And Landseer draws attention to the dog's human characteristics. The soulful look and gentle dignity of the bloodhound is contrasted with the mischievous expression of the small terrier. Dynamism of a dog on a leash. And this is 1912. This is a painting. And Giacomo Balla was a member of the Italian Futurists who wished to create an art for the new century celebrating speed, machines, and danger. And the artist painted this amusing study of a skittering dachshund and the staccato steps of its owner one day in May 1912. The feet of the woman, the leash, and the dog's body, from nose to tail, are all blurred and repeated. To enhance the impression of speed, if you notice that Balla has painted the ground using diagonal lines and placed his signature and the date at a dynamic angle. How to steal the show. Or perhaps he's reacting to Mickey and Cracker, whom some of you, if you saw the poster, this was on the poster. Now, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the first truly professional dog models came on the scene, and they're exemplified by the very famous Mickey and Cracker. The artist who painted them, Cecil Alden, was a master of dog portraits, and he had his subjects stay with him for at least a week or up to 3 weeks, so that during that time, he and his canine subjects were inseparable. And in his 1930s book, memoir, An Artist's Models, which was all about the dogs he painted, he wrote, "I have always endeavored to get at the character of my sitters in expression and feature, allowing them to pose naturally without the aid of unnecessary collars and chains." Now let's have a look at sculptures. And some of you may be familiar with the one on the left. This is by Jeff Koons, and Jeff Koons really tests the boundaries between popular and elite culture. And in Puppy, he created a work of art that references the 18th century formal European garden. Because look, here we've got a behemoth West Highland Terrier carpeted in bedding plants. The piece employs the most saccharine of iconography, flowers and puppies. It's a monument to the sentimental. Now, it's been described as dignified and stalwart, and it stands guard at the Bilbao Guggenheim Museum. And according to some reports, you can tell I'm a little skeptical, Puppy fills viewers with awe and perhaps joy. And on the right, we have Ellie. And I came across this very recently. Now, Ellie is a giant dog sculpture, and she is known as Mucky Pup. And she was commissioned by a pet food company to promote how healthy soil supports natural ingredients in pet food. She was placed outside Somerset House, which is a very famous building in London, where the exhibition, Soil, the World at Our Feet, was taking place. Her magnificent coat was made of clay and soil, which she was only on display for 2 days, which I think is probably very fortunate, given what the weather in England can be like. And it was only 2 days because it was a short-term, high-impact marketing installation designed for a specific campaign launch. And that is exactly what I quoted from the information I found it. So again, those are not my words. Now, You Complete Me by Banksy. Banksy is the mysterious British street artist. Nobody knows his identity. There are approximations about what his age is, but he's been around for a very long time. And apparently he caused quite a stir during his month-long New York residency. And I'm putting residency in inverted commas because nobody really knew he was there until things like this, pieces like this, appeared on walls. So what I found lovely about this is I don't know how many pieces he did exactly during this month-long residency, but beside each piece, there was a 1-800 hashtag number that people could phone if you wanted more information about the art. And this one, what I really like, implies that hydrants are made for dogs to pee on. And we're going to continue with the urination theme for a little bit, because on the right we have Bad Dog. And if those of you who were here 3 years ago may remember seeing this 3 years ago, what I was unable to find is that inside the dog is yellow paint, and periodically it would squirt onto the wall, mimicking urine. But I think that those have been removed. This is from 2013. And Bad Dog was part of Richard Jackson's first retrospective at the Orange County Museum of Art. But let's go back and look at some figures in history. We have Diogenes and dogs. The Greek philosopher Diogenes, also known as the dog, was born around 410 BCE. He became homeless by choice and took up residence in a large earthenware storage jar that you can see here. And for the next few years, Diogenes lived, ate, and even publicly masturbated in his street dwelling. And it is this behavior that gained Diogenes the nickname the dog. Once, when asked why he was called the dog, Diogenes calmly replied that, "I fawn on the people who give me something, bark at those who don't, and sink my teeth into scoundrels." His companions were dogs who also served as emblems of his philosophy, which emphasized an austere existence. On the right, we have Saint Dominic de Guzman. And when Saint Dominic's mother, the Blessed Jane of Azza, was pregnant, she had a dream of a dog with a torch in its mouth running around the world and setting everything on fire. Understandably concerned about the dream, she went to the monastery of Santo Domingo de Silos and asked a monk what it meant. He replied that the child in her womb would be a great preacher who would set the world ablaze with the fire of his words. And the word Dominican is a play on the Latin Domini Canes, which means dogs of the Lord. And the artist, Claudio Coelho, he painted 5 versions of Santo Domingo for the Dominican monastery in El Rosario in Madrid, and a quite different Santo Domingo on the left. And I included this. This is from the St. Cecilia Mother House, a convent in Nashville, Tennessee. And I included it because there's the dog, and the dog is looking up at St. Dominic. And I wanted to contrast that with the very austere interior of a church in Delft. One of the things that I found in researching this talk is all kinds of fascinating facts about dogs. And one of them that I didn't know before is that in Netherlandish Europe, dog models were used extensively as props in everyday scenes. But perhaps the inclusion of the dog here, now I need to point out what he's doing, you can see him there, is an indication that the church was open to all, even dogs who wished to use the facilities. And here we have, you see the 2 boys here, that they are scribbling on the column. And then here, there is a grave being dug. And the austerity of this church is because the images were stripped and the walls were whitewashed by the Protestant reformers in the 16th century. So the Dutch Republic's large Gothic churches offered a compelling subject for artists. So we'll move away from dogs and their toilet habits and onto hunting dogs. So this is, on the left, is an illustration from the magnificent Le Livre de la Chasse by Gaston Phoebus. He was a master of the hunt in southern France, and he reputedly owned more than 1,600 hounds. His book describes the cutting edge of 14th century veterinary care, advising that, and I'm quoting, "If one's dogs have hurt their feet running in evil country among thorns and briars, one should wash their feet with sheep's tallow boiled in wine, and so that they may not break their claws running on hard ground, one should cut a little off the end of the claws with pincers before the hounds go hunting." A very, very good advice. And on the right, we have Diana with her hunting dogs beside Hill. Diana with her hunting dogs was a very popular theme in art from the Renaissance through the 19th century because it allowed artists to combine classical mythology with themes of power, independence, and nature, whilst also providing a socially acceptable way to paint the female nude. Because after all, if one is going to go hunting and one is a woman, one does want to have one breast exposed. As the Roman goddess of the hunt and wild animals, Diana, often accompanied by greyhounds, symbolized chastity, fierce independence, and a connection to the untamed wilderness. And very different types of hunters. Hunting deer and wild boar had been the sport of kings. Hunting rats was definitely less prestigious and employed a completely different kind of dog, the terrier. For example, did you know that sweet little Yorkshire Terriers were bred specifically to hunt down rats in the cotton mills of northern England? One observation from the time was that rat catchers never went in fear of unemployment. And in this painting, Sir Edwin Landseer has used his own dogs as models, and he's captured the action at the dog's eye level, so putting us, the viewers, right in the picture. So Brutus, who is Landseer's rough white-haired terrier, has already slayed 2 rats and is posed to assassinate a 3rd. But what I love are the expressions on this one and this one, and this poor, the 3rd rat here. But look at the concentration on Brutus's face. And Callum. Now, even though Callum has a rat at his feet, that's what I'm not going to talk about his rat, because he was a Dandy Dinmont Terrier, which is a breed I had never heard of. And he was owned by a Mr. James Cowan Smith from Edinburgh, who in 1919 bequeathed almost £53,000 to the Scottish National Gallery. In today's money, that would be more than 4.55 million US dollars. And his bequest had 2 conditions. The first was that the gallery provided for his dog Fury, who survived him. And the second was that John Ens's portrait of his previous dog Callum should always be hung in the gallery. Both conditions were fulfilled, and although Fury is long since dead, Callum still hangs in the gallery in memory of his owner. And I recently read in Gastro Obscura that there was a reference, somebody had been to the National Gallery of Scotland, and sure enough, there was Callum. Now, before I leave hunters, dogs and hunting, I'd like to read from how it works, the dog. When I was growing up in England, and possibly it was the same for Paul, I was taught to read using ladybird books, very simple sentences. So this is a parody of an early ladybird book, and you can, oh, I should move it on, shouldn't I? That would help. And this is, so here we have, and so this is how it works, the dog. Dog and man have been friends for many thousands of years. Dognald is going to bury his owner's dinner in the garden in case any hyenas or jackals or saber-toothed tigers come and try to steal it. And now we're going to move on to owners and their pets. Now, the painting on the left may be familiar to some of you. It's a very famous Arnolfini portrait, and I could spend a couple of hours talking about what is going on here, but for our purposes, the only thing we're interested in is the griffin here, the dog. Because the presence of a small dog, in this case a griffin, in the foreground of the Arnolfini portrait is a reference to conjugal fidelity. And Van Eyck was one of the first artists to use oils. And in this painting, he's used it to great effect, not only to show the extraordinary beauty of the textiles, but also to capture the texture and multiple colors of the Griffin Terrier's coat. And Van Eyck was also the first to paint such a realistic domestic scene. And a complete contrast, French woman, her child, and pet dog. Because although the title says French woman, the Japanese artist Hiroshige has given the woman facial features of the East and decorated her hooped dress with fans. But our interest is in the dog. Look at him. Look at that red tongue. He's full of energy, vitality, and good humor. And the good humor, despite the little boy, who's considerably bigger than he is, riding on his back and using his ears as handlebars. And it's been suggested that the artist was perhaps trying to portray a superhound from Japanese mythology. Now, a number of artists have done self-portraits of themselves with their dogs, so I thought it would be interesting to look at a few of them. And on the left, we have Self-Portrait in Oriental Attire by Rembrandt. And this painting is unique as the only full-length self-portrait by Rembrandt. He did, I think, 80 self-portraits, but most of them were to the shoulders, so this one is unusual. And he's wearing an ornate, Western-inspired costume with a turban, and it was a very popular style in 17th century Holland because it represented exoticism. And a shaggy dog sits at his feet. Now, interestingly, technical analysis via an X-ray revealed that Rembrandt's legs were very short, or he painted them short, and it's believed that he added the dog later to conceal the original unsatisfactory rendering of his own legs. But what I'd like you to look at Rembrandt's hair and look at the dog's ears. I mean, you can't tell me that was accidental, that perhaps if he'd chosen a terrier, it wouldn't have produced quite the same effect. And then we move on to one of my favorite friend artists, Gustave Courbet. So here we see a young, self-assured Courbet depicted with long, dark hair, seated on the ground with his black spaniel. He portrays himself as a wanderlust artist. He's got a walking stick in the background, he's got his sketching equipment, and he's representing the romantic bohemian lifestyle popular in 1840s France. When Courbet moved to Paris from Eastern France, he began to dress as a dandy, and you can see that here with his cape, and it's turned back to reveal the yellow lining and the hat, and also, I'm not sure if it shows up, but his pants, his trousers, are a very elegant plaid. Now, he acquired a black English Spaniel, and that was a breed which was very popular at the time. And the Spaniel appears in 2 self-portraits, but we don't know the name. But again, I draw your attention to the Spaniel's ears and the shape of his head, and also to Courbet. And Frida Kahlo, of course. Frida Kahlo surrounded herself with parrots, little Mexican monkeys, and dogs. And given her passion for Mexico's pre-Hispanic past, it's not surprising that her canine companions should be xolos, those living representations of the Aztec deity Xolotl, or that she named the first one she had, Señor Xolotl. He figured not just in this 1945 self-portrait, where she's drawn on her own dictionary of symbols and allegories, but also in the painting The Love Embrace of the Universe, the Earth, Mexico, myself, Diego, and Señor Xolotl. On the right, David Hockney and his dogs. In September 1993, after the death of a close friend, British artist David Hockney turned to his pet dogs, Stanley and Bougie, for artistic inspiration. He set up canvases all around his house so that he would be ready to work, painting quickly whenever the dogs settled in positions long enough for him to be able to paint them. He worked around their schedules rather than trying to pose them, and he followed their natural rhythms of sleeping, eating, and wandering through rooms. He soon had an impressively large collection of work featuring the animals, which became the basis of a 1995 exhibition in England and his 2006 book, David Hockney's Dog Days. And this is one of the things that he said: "I make no apologies for the apparent subject matter. These 2 dear little creatures are my friends." And away from artists, but to an author, John Steinbeck and Charlie. Charlie was a French poodle and the loyal, elderly canine companion who accompanied author John Steinbeck on a 1960 10,000-mile trip across the United States. He was a blue standard poodle born in Paris, and he was often referred to as an old French gentleman. And he served as a charming, sometimes mischievous companion who helped break the ice with people. And I'm sure some of you will remember Travels with Charlie. It was possibly a book you had to read in school. And on the right, not an author and not a painter, Mrs. Janet Sheed Roberts. Now, she was painted by the English portrait painter John Wonnacott, whose great passion is creating, and this is what he says, a unique relationship between painting and observation and crafting the visual experience for the spectator. So the full title of this painting is Mrs. Janet Sheed Roberts, aged 110, with Frenchie, aged 4. Now, while I'm very impressed with the advanced age of the sitter, my eyes are actually drawn to Frenchie, who's clearly seen something very interesting in the garden. Now, sadly, dogs, that sometimes their owners die. So we're going to be looking at some of these. And I will tell you that when I was doing a run through this afternoon, that when I was speaking about the one on the right, so I'm warning you, I don't think it's going to happen, but I began to cry. So because it's very heart-wrenching. So on the left, we have effigy of Sir Richard Pembridge, a Knight of the Garter, and this is 1375. We associate dogs with fidelity, and it's in this role that dogs appear on medieval gravestones, of which this is one. Sir Richard Pembridge was a star of innumerable battles during the 100 Years' War, and he had given detailed instructions for his burial. And although he was buried facing the Virgin Mary as requested, with his head resting on a wreath of roses and a plume of feathers, he still wanted his pet dog at his side, or rather at his feet. Beautifully carved and showing accurate and close observation, the fur is especially well rendered, and the dog's face shows great individuality. And look at, he's wearing a collar, a sign of his attachment to his knight. And on the right, we have Requiescat, because together with Sir Edwin Landseer, Briton Riviere was one of the foremost Victorian animal painters in Great Britain. And this large oil on canvas has a haunting, tender, sentimental atmosphere. Here we see another medieval knight, his armor still on, and the wreath resting on his chest tells us that he's dead. At the knight's side, the bloodhound sits faithfully, staring up at his master's face, and look at the dog's expression. He's keeping vigil, holding on to a bond that death can't break. The title, Requiescat, is Latin, meaning rest in peace. And it's as if the dog is silently offering that prayer, staying by the knight's side in this quiet, sacred moment. The English novelist and playwright John Galsworthy wrote of dogs, "These quiet friends carry away with them so many years of our own lives." And the poignancy of this photograph touches me every time I look at it. This is a moving dual portrait of a Confederate soldier and his dog. And the one on the right, this is the absolute killer for me. Will he come back? 1918. So this very touching oil painting by the British artist Robert Morley depicts a loyal dog waiting by the window for his master. And it symbolizes the heartbreak, loyalty, and loss felt by many families during the First World War. Sadly, the First World War certificate of condolence, which you can see up here, confirms that Sapper Alexander Murray, of the Royal Engineers will never come back, sorry. Yes, one can be very sentimental about dogs. Let's move on to working dogs now that I've made things sad. Working dogs are still in widespread use today. And in fact, the number of jobs they can do grows every year. And according to the photographer Andrew Fladabo, they represent God's greatest gift to humanity, a species sagacious and noble, willing to do whatever we ask of them, and only asking for some food and a pat on the head in return. On the left, we have one of the earliest depictions of guide dogs, and this is from a papal decree of Pope Gregory IX, which was produced in the south of France at the end of the 13th century. And the photographer Andrew Fladabo, that you see on the right, discovered the unique bonds between people and their dogs, as well as the animal's strong desire to work. And this is while he was traveling the globe, photographing working dogs in their element. For his series, The Shepherd's Realm, He traveled to the Netherlands, the Highlands of Scotland, southern France, Norway, and New Zealand. And this is what he said: "Seeing them in action made me realize just how devoted they are to us. They love to work, and the bond between human and dog is uncanny. Dogs as pets definitely have an important role to play, but to me, the dog is at its best and happiest when it has a job to do." So now I'm going to go on to an honor roll, beginning with Laika. It was tough being one of the thousands of stray dogs on the streets of Moscow, and it was these tough, streetwise, and friendly dogs that scientists from the Moscow Aviation Institute had in mind for their secret space research program. Laika was the first space hero. Thought to be part husky, part terrier, she'd been taken from the Moscow streets and was trained to become accustomed to living in a spacecraft. She was sealed in her rocket on November the 3rd, 1957. News of the record-breaking space dog made front-page news around the world. I won't describe how she died, but she was the first of the space dogs to be commemorated in books, on stamps, and postcards. There were Laika-branded cigarettes and matches, and her image was printed on ornaments, paperweights, clocks, and watches. To tie in with the Soviet anniversary celebrations, Laika was often portrayed looking noble next to Lenin. The dog was presented as though she'd known she was dying for an important cause, helping her masters conquer outer space. On the right, we have Jack, the failed sniffer dog. In England, Jack the Cocker Spaniel was sacked by the police. His career as a detection dog was an utter failure. He was more interested in people than in cannabis and made some embarrassing mistakes, including begging for treats from potential offenders rather than alerting officers about drugs in the offender's possession. However, he was found a new home, and there he became the devoted companion to his new owner, a wife and mother who had breast cancer, and she required both chemo and radiation treatment. And this is what she wrote about him: "Jack gave me a job. He nudged me off the sofa, gave me love and gave me structure. He lay on the bathroom floor with me when I was vomiting and never let me out of his sight. I felt unlovable and he loved me, steadily and without demand." Frida, the rescue dog. And I can see some of you nodding your heads because she is the very famous Mexican rescue dog. She was a yellow Labrador who worked as a search and rescue dog for the Mexican Navy, deployed to help rescue efforts in the aftermath of natural disasters. She was equipped with protective goggles, harness, and boots, and she was trained to bark if she detected someone in need of help. She took part in 55 rescue operations. She was in Haiti following the 2010 devastating earthquake, where she was credited with locating 12 survivors. She gained international recognition following the 2017 earthquake that really struck the state of Puebla and Mexico City. And Valerie, who I describe as the intrepid survivor. Valerie is a miniature dachshund, and she went missing on South Australia's very sparsely populated Kangaroo Island in November 2023. She captured the world's attention when she was rescued 529 days later, and she had put on weight. And they had no idea how this had happened because there were, as I say, the island was very scarcely populated. But she captured, as I said, the world's attention. She now makes VIP appearances, raises money for pet adoption services. There's a Valerie-themed beer, and she even has a public relations representative. And Aloka, the peace dog. Originally a stray on the streets, Aloka began following monks in India in 2022 and surviving a car accident and illness to stay by their side, earning the name Aloka, meaning light, and also a permanent home with them. He accompanied a group of Buddhist monks on a recently completed 3,700-kilometer walk from Texas to Washington, D.C. And on the right, we have Jazzy. This is a rescue pup, and Michael has Jazzy to thank for saving his life when he fell into a diabetic coma. In 2018, Michael was at home when his blood sugar levels dropped dangerously low, and it was Jazzy's incessant barking that brought the attention of Christine, Michael's mother. But Jazzy was doing so much more than barking, because when Christine found Michael, Jazzy was sitting on his chest and digging her paws into his chest and also bumping her head against his. And on the left, we have Van Gogh. Now, this is a one-eared rescue dog that was saved from the cruel world of dogfighting through the power of art. And so this is a very feel-good tale. The North Carolina Boxer Pit Bull mix, age 7, has become an internet sensation thanks to his colorful abstract paintings. But more importantly, Van Gogh's canvases also helped the canine creative find his forever home and raise money for a dog rescue facility. And the most popular painting is Starry Night, which you can see up there. And how this was achieved, the person who fostered him initially when he was rescued came up with the idea, and she had small canvases, and she layered paint across, and she then put the canvas in a plastic bag, and she brushed across the outside of the plastic bag peanut butter. And Van Gogh loved peanut butter, and so the way that he licked the peanut butter off resulted in the painting. And on the right, Misty Sky. She was a 3-year-old rescue dog who had lost an eye. And Jill Rappaport, a journalist and animal advocate, featured Misty Sky in a dog rescue campaign, specifically for a Christmas Eve post. And there was a happy ending. Misty Sky was adopted, and I'm very thankful personally that she no longer has to wear the red dress with the frilly headline, with the frilly neckline. Now, I'm sure some of you have been waiting all night for this. The title of this is A Bold Bluff. And this was the headline in an article. Beloved by all but the art world was the headline that in an article that I read about one of the most well-known collection of paintings prominently featuring dogs playing poker. This iconic series by the American painter Cassius Marcellus Coolidge was a commission for a cigar ad campaign. It began in 1894, and the final painting, in a set of 16, was completed in 1910. This one was done in 1903. Each depicts a group of dogs playing a game of poker, and collectively, these paintings have become iconic. And one art critic has described the poker-playing dogs as, and I quote, indelibly burned into the American collective schlock subconscious. And ever since Coolidge created the series, they've appeared in a range of films, TV shows, cartoons, and uncannily, the earnest animals resemble people we know. Now, in this one, we've got 2 of the dogs smoking cigars, and the Doberman, I think, is smoking a pipe. But I particularly love the expression on the second dog on the left, who really appears to be glaring at, I'm not sure if it's a Saint Bernard. So I'm very fond of this painting. And we have to have a few cartoons. On the left, a particular favorite of mine. Did you know that cats were considered sacred in ancient Egypt? We were a symbol of grace and poise. And the dog replies, Did you know I'm a very good boy? And I would say this is particularly for Ian and Jane, who are passionate cat lovers, so would appreciate that cartoon, as they would the one on the right. A number of us here are in a book club, and so I thought it was very fitting that we have this one, which I'm sorry, I can't remember what it says now. Oh, I found the protagonist problematic, and I love the image of the cat on the front. Now, recently, my husband Doug and I were at lunch at John and Gillian Ball's, and to my delight, on the left was a cocktail napkin. These were the cocktail napkins. So I had to include it because it's so perfect. Only a dog could go to a party, speak to no one, steal food, fall asleep, and then still be the most popular guest. And on the right, a real tearjerker of a card. Dog is such a small world, such a small word for something that takes up so much room in your heart. Now, because I've been so immersed in dogs, thinking about them, reading about them, looking at them, when I came across this headline in the New Yorker, the lab studying AI minds, you can imagine what I immediately thought of. So, fortunate to have a friend living in New Brunswick, whom some of you know, Ted Michner, known as Mitch, and he is an artist and a cartoonist. And I sent this to him, and I asked if he would do a cartoon. And this is what he did. So at the bottom we have a lab technician, and I love this, amazing dog tour. And then it spoke, blah, blah, blah. You can read what it says. Anyway, I think it's a wonderful cartoon, and I'm very appreciative that Mitch did this. And I'd like to say a word about Marsha Huss. Some of you know her. Marsha is 81 from Missoula, Montana, and she has rescued hundreds of abandoned street dogs in her 30 years in Tepoztlan. Now, due to ill health and dwindling funds, she's closing her beloved shelter. This time last year, Marsha had 97 happy and healthy dogs that faced being put to sleep. Luckily, a small team of hardworking volunteers, some of whom are here tonight, stepped up to assist Marsha in her home, and crucially, they have helped rehouse as many dogs as possible, some to very good homes in Tepoztlan, Cuernavaca, and Mexico City. But to date, the dog's best chance of finding forever homes, and these are Susanna Sejas's words, and she is not here tonight because she flew, I think, 2 nights ago to Paris with a rescue dog, with one of Marsha's rescue dogs. But I liked her finding forever homes, has been in the US and Canada. And Tanya, I thought that this might give you an idea for a canine residence. So this is Sir John Soanes. Sir John Soanes was a very famous architect. He was the son of a bricklayer. And this was his design, his original design from the late 1700s. And this is an 1835 copy, so it's perhaps a little elaborate for Tepoztlan. And so we have Animales con Buenavibra, but let me leave you with these thoughts. Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. Many thanks, and I'll hand you over to Tanya. Thank you.